A lot of fights this weekend. A lot of things on the plate. The lightweight division has been pretty active. We've had boxing. We've had 3 of the elite guys fight in the last 2 weeks, and we have another one coming up this coming week. So we have a lot to talk about.
Hey, the 2 big lightweight stars, Devin Haney and Tank Davis, they basically own the weekend. And Devin Haney impressed a lot of people, winning a unanimous decision over Jojo Diaz. And Devin Haney's the WBC franchise champion. It's a nonsensical title, completely nonsensical, because George Kambosos really holds the best claim to the lightweight title, and he holds the WBC version as well. But Devin Haney, 3 years ago when I saw him fight at Madison Square Garden, small arena, the Hulu Theater, I reported on the fight for the publication I write for Boxing News, and I wrote down that Devin Haney could be a generational star. I mean, I saw him being conceivably an all-time great in the mold of a Sugar Ray Leonard, a Tommy Hearns, a Marvin Hagler. And, and he seemed on track that way until a couple of fights ago against Jorge Linares. He was doing great.
When he stepped up.
He stepped up and he did great for 9 rounds. He dominated for 9 rounds, but then he got buzzed. He lost the last 3 rounds, was holding on, and he earned a decision over tough Jorge Linares. And I wondered, was that just a little blip at the end of the fight? Okay. But he didn't, really completely rebound from that to show total dominance and total greatness. He had with Yorkis Gamboa, he won wide enough, but really didn't finish the job or stop Gamboa. Then he fought last Saturday, Jojo Diaz, a very good, solid fighter who beat Kevin Farmer for his belt. And I was at the Diaz-Farmer fight, and I thought Diaz was going to beat Farmer, and he did, but it was a relatively close fight against Farmer that Diaz won. And Farmer, from your neck of the woods, Philadelphia, knows a very good fighter, but not a world beater, not world class. We can agree on that. And Jojo Diaz came short against Gary Russell, a wonderful fighter. He only fights once a year. It's ridiculous. He fights enough Gary Russell basically to pay the bills. I mean,
But what a talent.
But I wanted to see Devin Haney dominate completely dominate. Not to win clearly on the scorecards. That's not domination. He had 2 scores, a 117, 111, the other 116, 112. No one can dispute the decision. He clearly won, but it was a tough fight. He got hit a lot. I credit Devin Haney for standing and exchanging punches, but it just, the level of dominance wasn't there. I mean, I tried to picture a guy like a Roberto Duran type, a lightweight, or Sugar Ray Leonard type. That's a better comparison to Haney's style. I don't think those guys would be as hard pressed. Those guys wouldn't get hit nearly as much. And Haney struggled, even though he won by a wide margin. And he's not going to be the generational star that I thought he was. I have to retract that. It doesn't mean he can't be a Hall of Famer. But when we look back, when people are going to look back 20 years from now in this era, I have doubts whether they're going to look at Haney on the short list of great fighters of this era. But it remains to be seen. The jury's still out, but I may have jumped the gun on him. He's the equivalent of a draft choice that you think is going to be an all-time great. And instead of that, he's a very good, solid player.
All right, Jack, you done?
I am.
You should have
called in on Haney being a generation.
You should have called me before that, because as good as I thought Haney was and as skilled as he is, I never saw him in that mode. I think the fight that we saw the other night is kind of at least what I expected. Haney used his reach and his legs. He tried to control the fight with the jab, occasional good right cross, but neither guy was hurt. Diaz had the advantage when he forced it, and then Haney reset, started to box, and went back to what he would try to do and just to reestablish control of the fight. But, I don't think Haney was impressive. I think he was good. I'm not sure he was even outstanding. I'd say Haney fought an efficient fight, not an impressive fight. The lightweight division, as we both know, is a very fast track. And I've been saying this since we've been doing the show, Jack. We have all these lightweights that are really good. Do we know who the best is? No, we don't know who the best is. But I think it would be great for boxing if they all fought each other. And I don't think any one of them, maybe if Lomachenko was in his prime, but I don't think any one of them would go undefeated against the field. But boxing would have about 5 years of outstanding fights.
Yeah, Joe Bergman writes down workmanlike win for Haney, but that's not what I'm looking for in Haney. And he's talking with George Kambosos after the fight, and Haney's saying, yeah, he'll go to Australia. Listen, a Sugar Ray Leonard type fighter would never go to Australia, for a fight like that. It's like Haney needs these guys more than they need him. I think
absolutely
Haney would be such a big attraction. I thought he had that ability. Listen, you never know with fighters. I went out on a limb a lot of years ago predicting greatness on this featherweight. Remember Tom Boom Boom Johnson, okay?
Yes.
Tom Boom Boom Johnson, I thought could conceivably be an all-time great. And it depends on how you're judging him. He obviously wasn't, but he made 11 title defenses of his IBF featherweight title. That's pretty darn good. 11 title defenses of any title you hold, but he never got to the point where I, thought he would be.
But Jack, if Haney fought all the guys in the division, and if he went undefeated, we would talk about him in that regard. I don't think that he will, but right. The book is not written, and these guys all have a legacy out there, but who's going to be the one to step up and grab it? That's the one thing I like about Lomachenko. He is willing to fight everybody because he really wants to be the best. And these lightweights, as good as they are, Jack, I really get tired of the fights on Instagram and Twitter. Shut up and fight each other. We know Mayweather's going to protect Tank, but the other guys clean out the division.
Frank, look at all the lightweights. They fight for different promoters. That's why it's hard.
Another problem.
Make the fight. Ryan Garcia fights for Golden Boy Promotions. Tank Davis fights for Mayweather Promotions.
TMT, okay? Yep.
Devin Haney fights for Matchroom Promotions. Okay. George Kambosos, he's fought for Matchroom, but he's promoted by DeBella. He's basically a free agent, it seems, so kind of good for him. He could pick and choose a little more. It's hard to get them all together. Tank Davis, for example. I had my say on Haney. I didn't see the fight with Tank Davis. It was a pay-per-view show on a Sunday night last night while the Broncos were playing the Chiefs. I didn't think the undercard was particularly strong.
No, it wasn't.
I liked the card from top to bottom. I would have gotten the pay-per-view thing, but I usually don't because they usually don't give you a good undercard. It has to be worth it to me. And if I have a big game between the Denver Broncos and Kansas City Chiefs, for me to pay money, to watch something else, you better give me a darn top-of-the-line product. But with that said, Isaac Cruz, came up with a much better effort than was really anticipated. Why don't you tell us about it, Frank?
All right, Jack. First of all, let me just say this. Cruz is a nightmare to fight. He hits hard. He doesn't give you room to breathe. He carries his power. He moves his head. He takes a hell of a shot. His only liability is he's predictable. But even that doesn't mean much because he never stops coming at you. So I don't see many guys who would want to fight him. Davis had no choice but to fight in reverse. He said he hurt his hand. He fought as the counter puncher. But he did impress me, Jack, that he used his intelligence and he used every trick in the book, spinning him around. It was a tough, close fight. I think the decision was, 115, 113 twice, 116, 112. It could have really gone either way. I didn't score it as I watched it, but Davis showed patience and maturity. You could see he was trying to get Cruz to tire himself out. He didn't, but Cruz never tired. Good performance by both guys. Davis has definitely reached his limit as far as size. And think about this. I was thinking about this earlier, and I shared it with a friend of mine. Davis and Lopez both fought guys that they feared they'd steamroll. And then they find out when they get into the fight that the guy they had in front of him was much better than they thought, and he was prepared. What happened? Lopez doesn't change a bit, comes back with the same thing every round. Davis, he changes his style and adjusts the game plan, and you can make a case that's why he won. He showed he was more diverse. He was in with a guy that gave him a tough style. He adjusted, and if he wasn't a real fighter, he would have lost to Cruz. He really would have. So I think it clears up as far as who's better between Tank and Lopez. I'm not saying that Tank would beat Lopez, but I think the Tank is the better skilled fighter. But again, if you have Tank, Lopez, Lomachenko, Garcia, and Stevenson, and even Haney, none of those guys are a lock to beat the other five. Nobody would go 5 for 5. So the division could really heat up. And then if you bring in guys like Prograis and maybe Taylor at 140, boy, I'll tell you, Jack, there's a lot of fights out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you the hardest one to beat in that group if they're fighting around 135. If not at this moment, then, in the coming months, it's going to be Shakur Stevenson because he has that lockdown style. He's so hard to hit, so hard to penetrate his defense. Even if he's not going to look particularly good in a fight, he's
the water guy. He can adjust and he's getting stronger. I would agree with that. He could morph into this style that would best suited to be who he had to be that night. He'd fight Lopez different than Tank. He'd fight Garcia different. So I would agree. With that. And I don't think we'll see those fights for a while. Well, but I do think that he's the coming star.
Eventually, these promoters, if they can't find an opponent, okay, for the guy they're promoting, they sometimes will go into a co-promotion. My feeling is the way it's going to play out, Kambosos, this is just my prediction, is going to fight Lomachenko next. That's the fight Lomachenko would want as well.
Provided Lomachenko looks good Saturday night, I agree.
He just has to win Lomachenko. He has enough of a reputation. And if he doesn't look that good, Kambosos is going to want to fight him even more, you would think. But I kind of feel that's the fight. Kambosos is talking about an opponent coming to Australia, an 80,000-seat arena. It's going to be hard to get someone to go to Australia. Would Lomachenko actually go to Australia? Money talks.
I have no doubt in my mind Lomachenko would go.
Right. But money talks at the end of the day as far as, going there not. And Tank Davis, who might, I don't know what Mayweather's going to do.
No way, Jack. No way.
I mean, I think they're going to want to try to keep protecting him. Not that he needs protection per se, because he's a heck of a fighter. But I think Mayweather's taking a conservative approach. But they got to fight someone. I mean, they got to fight someone of substance. And, who are they going to find?
Jack, I agree. I think, and as Joe said earlier, let's give Tank credit. So he did hurt his hand and he adjusted. He's more than a puncher. He's also reached his limit at 135. But back to what we were talking about, I believe Lomachenko wants his titles back so bad. And I think when he looks at Kambosos, he says, you know what? This guy's not quite as good as he looked against Lopez. I can handle him. And if I have to fight him to get my titles back, I'll go to Australia. And the other thing is with Tank, and we talked about this, and let's kick it around now. I have a theory. Why do you think they had to fight on a Sunday night with Tank?
You tell me.
All right, here's my theory. Okay. If you remember, when Mayweather never fought pay-per-view until he fought Arturo Gatti in Atlantic City. Second the fight's over, that's it, I'm on pay-per-view. And he kind of conditioned the fans that from that point on, he was a pay-per-view fighter. Well he's done.
Let me cut in. Didn't he fight his exhibition fight on a Sunday night? If I'm not mistaken.
And against one of the Paul brothers, but he's retired now. He's a fun fighter. He's not a real fighter now. But he never fought on a Sunday night coming up. Now, this is my opinion. Mayweather has Tank on pay-per-view. So right now, Jack, fans are used to paying to see Tank fight. If Tank decides to fight you, it's going to be on pay-per-view, okay? And I also think Mayweather had it on Sunday night because, as we talked earlier, he didn't want to go against Haney because if Haney had better numbers, he loses that debate in the public's mind. And I also think that Mayweather's a type guy. Now, remember, he spent from the time he fought Oscar De La Hoya until he fought Pacquiao, he spent his whole career saying, my fans love me because I give them the fights they want, where nothing could be further from the truth. He never fought anybody the fans demanded when they demanded it. He waited for the other guy to be on the climb. So now, with the Sunday night fight, you figure it's the month of Christmas. Like you said, the Broncos-Chiefs was a division game that they both needed. Okay? This was a big weekend for football between college and the NFL. I believe Mayweather did that just in case the numbers were bad. He could say, well, look, we still did X amount of people, and we had to go against the NFL. We had to go against another fight. I think he did that, and I think when the numbers come out, Jack, regardless of what they are, the TMT is going to spin them that they were great numbers, and that's going to be Floyd's way of pushing the narrative that Tank is a future star and a pay-per-view fighter.
But the thing about it, the bottom line is Tank's got to get paid. And eventually, Tank might show some discontent with Mayweather. You don't know what goes on behind the scenes. He might be saying, I should be getting $5 million a fight. Why am I getting $1 million a fight? Okay? And they're going to eventually have to open up and try to make Tank happy. I mean, that's what
eventually, yes. But I think because Mayweather's made so much money and he influences the kids so much, he'll say, look, I was at HBO for a while fighting for a couple of million. Just follow the plan with me, and I'll show you how to get there. And I think that's what's going to happen. And as I said earlier, Jack, if I was a gifted fighter like Tank, I'd certainly let Mayweather manage me for a while. There's no doubt about it. But I would leave at a certain point because there will come a point, if Tank gets too big, Mayweather's going to try to get him knocked off, or he's not going to advise him well because we know.
No, Frank.
He's too insecure, Jack.
Crazy conspiracy theory.
That's not a crazy conspiracy.
Get Tank Davis knocked off.
Not for a while, but eventually down. You mean to tell me if Tank gets to be 48-0, Mayweather's not going to try to get him knocked off? He doesn't want his legacy threatened.
Mayweather's not going to set him up deliberately to want him to lose. And listen,
Jack, I disagree. I would be leery of that. Jack, Terrence Crawford is what, 38-0? He's never going to go undefeated. But if Mayweather managed his career from here on out, we'd see Terrence Crawford retire undefeated too.
Okay, how is this theory? Could you imagine a fighter was approaching Mayweather's 50-0? And that's not even a record. That doesn't exist. That's a media creation.
Right. Well, Floyd sold the narrative great.
Use the word record. It's media nonsense to talk about the 50 fights because we've had a number of fighters who went past 50-0, in their career. So Mayweather doesn't hold any type of unbeaten streaks, anything along those lines at all.
But Jack,
it's the nonsense we heard with Rocky Marciano being 49-0. It's the, total nonsense. Oh, I want to break the Marciano record. I mean, such a thing doesn't even really exist, but the media kind of goes.
Well, they all shot for that. I mean, Larry Holmes talked about that too. But Mayweather,
created by Larry Holmes himself, he embellished it by pointing to it and saying it's something like that exists. They set a benchmark, a make-believe benchmark, and everyone.
But Jack, my thought is this. I hate to rag on Mayweather, but I just think that he has really influenced the fans and he's conditioned them into believing what's important. And he has them believing that O is the whole key to it. And he taught these guys how to protect it because at the end of the day, what did he always used to say? And he can use it with his guys. Well, who beat me? Well, you can't say, well, I thought Castillo beat you the first time. He can say, well, what's my record say?
But haven't we heard that with Rocky Marciano? The unbeaten record was his ID card. Had Rocky lost one fight,
if he would have lost to the Stars a fight, everything be different.
Exactly. If one of the decisions early on in his career, he fought Ted Lowry twice.
Never beat him convincingly.
The first fight, I have no idea. I mean, I didn't see it. No film exists, but reports were that Lowry may very well have won that fight. I mean,
Jack,
who
but
knows?
here's the difference, though.
Listen, I'll judge Marciano on being a great heavyweight champion in this era, not because of an unbeaten record. And Mayweather, I'll judge as a great fight in his era, not because of any unbeaten records.
But here's the difference between their records. Now, everybody can say that Marciano didn't fight any greats when they're in their prime. However, he was beating those guys more convincingly than anybody else was at that time. And the other thing is this. When Rocky retired, there was nobody left for him to fight. Sonny Liston had like 6 fights at that time. Patterson may have had 15.
Nothing but
so his record to me is more authentic. That's all.
It's a completely different record. One's got nothing to do with the other. I wouldn't compare a fighter from a different era, a record. Records are just numbers. They're deceiving. A lot of fighters suffer a number of defeats late in their career. And
right.
It really doesn't make the record look.
But Jack, think about this. Think about this, okay? You're a big football fan. So am I. Who's the greatest team you ever saw?
I'd say the Chicago Bears. The
85 Bears?
85 Bears, yeah.
Okay. When they do when NFL Films does a lot of these programs and they talk to the experts who was the best team, the unbeaten Dolphins never finished below number 2. Why? Because they didn't lose. And I think in boxing,
the Bears would have crushed that Dolphin team. Okay.
I don't think the Bears are the best team ever. But Jack, the zero, wait, let me finish. The zero makes you live in immortality. As much as I love Rocky Marciano.
No, Frank. So Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe, do you consider them all-time greats? I certainly don't. I mean,
in their weight class, if you had to name the top super middleweights of all time, they're 2 of the 3 or 4.
Super middleweight is a manufactured division.
But it's not going to go anywhere, Jack. It's going to be here long after we're gone.
It doesn't have a long history.
But one day it's going to. One day it's going to. And let me ask you this. Andre Ward, he could have lived with any of the top light heavyweights.
Roy Jones never competed too long in one particular division. It seemed like he moved around the division.
Light heavyweight was where he made the most offensive.
But he's not. But you wouldn't rate Roy Jones as one of the greatest light heavyweight champions of all time because he didn't spend a career there.
I'd have him in the top 10.
You'd think of Archie Moore. You'd think of Bob Foster, Michael Spinks, guys who spent the vast majority of their career in that division. Foster's whole career, Archie Moore's whole career, Spinks most of his career.
Jack, again, all I'm saying is this. Being undefeated keeps you in the conversation. Every year in football, what do we have? When a team goes 6-0, well, they beat the undefeated Dolphins records. That's why we talk about Marciano. That's why we'll talk about Mayweather. So it's like, I understand. To me and you, we know. But the people that they're selling these fights to, they think it's a big deal. And speaking of Bob Foster, go back and look at his record. He fought the weakest era of light heavyweights I've ever seen.
Well, I don't have to look at his record. I saw him fight Frank in the head.
He was a great fighter.
A light heavyweight nearly as devastating as Bob Foster. He wouldn't just stop guys. He stretched them, knocked them out. One punch power, unlike, Jack, I love where this is going because we're free flowing and we're talking about things. And let me just say this. I want to move. No, Frank.
I want to say this one point. You talk about Foster, Dwight Muhammad Qawi, Michael Spinks, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, Marvin Johnson, and Yaki Lopez would have defeated every light heavyweight Bob Foster fought in a title fight on the night he fought them. I rest my case.
Okay, but they wouldn't have beaten Bob Foster,
I think Qawi and Braxton would. Spinks.
Well, listen, let's talk about this weekend. We'll get when we on the light heavyweights. This is a good lively debate. we talked about Lomachenko a little while ago. He's fighting Richard Kami at Madison Square Garden this Saturday night. You know, it's a busy night in New York. I mean, on Thursday night, let me just throw in the plug. The Boxing Writers Association of America is holding its annual awards banquet at the Edison Hotel in Manhattan. Some tickets are still available. Go to bwaa.org if you're interested in attending. And then the day after the Lomachenko fight, Ring 8 is holding its yearly awards banquet at Russo's on the Bay, but that's sold out, okay? But the BWAA still has...
I mean, you couldn't get me in if I wanted you to?
What? No,
you couldn't get me in?
No media passes are given to that, because if media passes were given, think of it, all the riders would be going for nothing. And, you know, and it's a banquet. It's not like an extra seat, you know, meals are given the whole bit. What am I saying? Okay, and Saturday night, this is thing. Lomachenko fights Richard Kami, a good, solid fighter. You know, he lost his IBF lightweight title. Teofimo Lopez knocked him out in the second round. I thought Lopez was going to knock him out in one round. I thought he was just going to nail him off the bat, and Kami couldn't take Lopez's power. And that's what happened in the second round. But he's a good, solid fighter. Unless Lomachenko has slipped badly, he's not going to lose to Richard Kami. He should win decisively. People might play the comparison game. If Kami could go the distance, they might think, well, Teofimo knocked him out in a couple of rounds. It doesn't reflect well on Lomachenko. I think Lomachenko can't just win with some room to spare, but he really needs to dominate and send the message he's still amongst the short
the elite
pound for pound fighters, not just elite. I mean, not just maybe the best lightweight in the world, but maybe the best pound for pound fighter still. People aren't going to rate him number one after this performance, no matter what he does, but maybe top 3 pound for pound when all is said and done. And he needs to really send out a powerful message with a great, you know, scintillating performance. What do you think?
I agree with you. I don't think there's anything he can do to Comey that can erase what Lopez did, but they're different styles, different fights. I expect Comey to go more rounds than 2. And let's face it, Lomachenko, who I never had 1 pound for pound, but Lomachenko is not a full-fledged lightweight. He still may be fighting a division above where he belongs. Comey's a pretty good hitter, but the problem is, Jack, Comey is just so vanilla stylistically. He doesn't move that much. Lomachenko is stronger than people think. He has the best footwork in boxing. He's a pressure guy, but he's hard to hit. He makes you commit. He makes you reach, and then he peppers you. But I do think he will be dangerous, though, Jack, because Lomachenko has that gene, and I think anyone who follows boxing knows this guy has been bothered ever since he lost to Lopez. Look, he didn't take it well. He cried about the decision. I thought he clearly lost, but you can tell it bothered him, and he's on a mission to get those belts back. And I think that's what makes him very dangerous. Again, Comey's big. He can punch, but stylistically, Lomachenko should be able to do whatever he wants him, and I expect him to win the fight impressively and probably stop him.
I had picked Lopez to upset Lomachenko when they fought, because I saw that, you know, Lomachenko had been slipping. I kind of could notice it in some performances.
And he had the bad shoulder, too.
Yeah, but I didn't know about the shoulder, but I picked against him anyway in that fight. And, you know, having the shoulder surgery, coming back, I think it's a case of Lomachenko is never going to be the fighter he once was, but what's left is going to be a handful for whoever he goes against.
And people forget.
I kind of look at it.
He's 34 years old. He'll be 34 in February. He had 400 amateur fights. There are some miles on that body, but the one thing that helps him is he's never taken a beating. So he's not an old 34 other than just the miles he's put on.
I think that's overrated, Frank. I think
what?
That's one of boxing's great myths that we buy into, say, well, the guy has gotten hit a lot. He's taken some beatings. It's taken a lot out of him. Maybe mentally it has. If it's taken it out of him mentally, that's one thing I can understand entirely and agree with. But, you get pounded in one fight. It doesn't take anything out of you physically if you're fighting 6 months later.
I disagree, Jack. I think every time they come out of the ring, they're less than what they were.
That's one of those myths, the same way what they'd say with a fighter, well, if he had sex before, a fight, yeah, that could affect him if he hasn't been getting his sleep and getting his rest. But it doesn't affect him physically. And listen, they said that about Evander Holyfield before he fought Tyson the first time. Oh, Holyfield's been in so many tough fights. It meant nothing at all. Then that's just the way I look at it. But I think every time they come out of the ring, I think they're less than what they were. I don't think the human body was meant to be hit like that. It may not show overnight, but NFL players, every time they're in a tough game and they get pounded, they're not as good the next game. It takes something out of them, so they're not going to be the same player the next season. You could say that as well. I mean, that's a very physical sport. But listen, the other fights this weekend, Nonito Donaire's defending his WBO bantamweight title. You know what I like? The Showtime Network, unlike HBO, that bailed out of boxing completely, and they make that business decision. And what a shame, because HBO was the voice of boxing for a while.
Was.
Fighters would have given anything to fight on HBO, and Showtime was like a poor relation. But now
Showtime's the boxing channel.
But you know what Showtime reminds me of? A small market team. They're staying in business. They can still win. They can still get the right fights, but they've got to be extra smart. They don't quite have the resources, let's say the zone, but they build relationships. They have a relationship with the PBC, with Al Heyman, and they're getting certain good fights Showtime on there. So, kudos to them. They gave us the week before Brandon Figueroa, and Stephen Fulton, a very good, solid fight. Those are the type of fights they could give us. And you want to know something, Frank? For guys like you and I, we love it.
Absolutely.
As far as appetite, those are good, fights. And occasionally they could do the pay-per-view route. They have the resources, but they can't kind of be all in with that. Another interesting fight's taking place. It's going to be actually on the Zone Saturday, and it's in England, meaning if you're on the East Coast, you could get the fight about 6 p.m, a very nice time. If you're on the West Coast of the United States, 3 o'clock. It's in the UK. It's Conor Benn, Nigel Benn's son, who's forging a reputation of his own. He's unbeaten, and of course, they want to keep him unbeaten, like you were saying, with the marketability. He's fighting former belt holder Chris Algieri. Okay?
Who has a lot of miles on him.
He's got a lot of miles, but we think he's longer.
He does.
Because he's older, because he's been around. But Algieri is a physical fitness buff. He has a degree in nutrition from Stony Brook College.
He's a very bright guy.
He's into he's so analytical. He watches everything he eats, how many vitamins he takes. He always enters the ring in phenomenal shape. And Conor Benn has been usually untested. He beat Adrian Granados, but okay, fine. But he's usually untested, and Algieri at this point is a gatekeeper. And Algieri, like I say, has some mileage. Lost to Manny Pacquiao by decision, but basically got shut out, knocked down 6 times.
And that was a while ago.
And he moved up against Errol Spence, and Spence stopped him in the 5th round. Spence just was so much better. But listen, he could surprise us. He fought a fight at the Garden against a Britisher, Tommy Coyle, and he stopped him. So he might have a little going for him. Do you see any way Algieri, who's not a puncher, could maybe hand Conor Benn, his first defeat, upset him?
No, I don't think he has the power to beat him up enough to get the decision over there. And the fact that he's not a big puncher makes him safe, and it's a good name on Conor Benn's record. But this is basically a setup, and Algieri knows the score, and he just hopes maybe he can pull it off. If he pulls it off, he gets some more money, but he's a safe opponent. But he's not a guy that's going to come in and lay down. He's going to make him work. He's going to have to work and show a little bit because Algieri, again, on the decline, but a tough, intelligent guy that can protect himself and take care of himself. So I expect Conor to win by stoppage. I don't know about the rounds, but I have no doubt who wins the fight.
Frank, we're into the December. What's our December anniversary fight? What did you dig out of the files?
We are going to look at the Donald Curry, Milton McCrory fight from December 6th, 1985. If you remember at the time, Jack, Sugar Ray Leonard was out of the picture, and there were three welterweights who were making noise: Curry, Starling, and McCrory. Curry fought them both. He fought Starling twice. And what's interesting about that is their styles are different. Curry was a boxer puncher with quick hands and power. Starling was an outstanding defensive fighter. And McCrory, a lot of people thought he was the next Tommy Hearns, fought out of Kronk, trained by Manuel Stewart, 6'2", jab, right hand, fought behind the jab, moved around. And they fought for the undisputed title. Curry 24-0, McCrory 27-0. And it was the first welterweight unification bout since the Leonard Hearns fight.
I just got to say something about Milton McCrory. I don't think people were overly high on him because he'd had two tough fights with Colin Jones, the Britisher, with his title on the line. And the first one was a draw. The second one, McCrory won, but it was a tough fight that went the distance. So McCrory didn't have that little bit of invincibility that Tommy Hearns had going.
No, but Jack, but that's a fast track to compare him to Hearns because Hearns is one of the all-time greats.
Right. Well, you mentioned some people, maybe in Detroit. But listen, McCrory was handled, I believe, by Manuel Stewart. So,
yes.
If I'm not mistaken. And McCrory was very capable. And when we talk about Donald Curry, he's a Hall of Famer, got inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota. Right now, he's undergoing certain depression. We wish, him nothing but the best, that.
And he only had 40 fights, Jack.
That works out for him. But Donald Curry at his best, he reminds me of a great baseball player who didn't have the long career, who's not in his Hall of Fame, Don Mattingly. For a short window, Donald Curry, let's say for a year and a half, 2 years.
From 82 to 85.
Right. He was in the same league as Sugar Ray Leonard.
Jack?
Tommy Hearns. In the same league, I'm saying. You could say he was as good for a year or two, arguably.
Jack,
when he was,
Curry was one of the greatest fundamental fighters I have seen in my lifetime. He was a textbook fighter, no wasted movement or punches. He did everything the way it was supposed to be. He was efficient. He threw short, concise punches. Actually, his style was Joe Louis to a degree and a little bit of Alexis Arguello. But you talk about how good he was. Now, I don't think we've covered this yet, but I am a huge Sugar Ray Leonard fan. And I think he's one of the top three greatest fighters of my lifetime. I have him number 2 at welterweight, and I have Hearns in the top 5. However, the night that Curry took apart McCrory, I remember I had two of my best friends who I watched boxing with at the time. Actually, we still get together. Look, thank God. I remember saying to them after McCrory was taken apart by, am I still on?
Yeah, I hear you, Frank. Frank, you hear me?
Jack?
Can you
hear me?
I hear you. Okay, we're talking.
Can you hear me now?
We're talking about Donald Curry here, and when you hear me, Frank, cut in whatever. But I'll pick it up. I'll come in out of the.
How about now?
Well, you hear me? Okay, but what? Okay.
I'll be right there.
Donald Curry was like, picture perfect against Milton McCrory. The way he, stopped him in the second round. I mean, it was like one of
Right.
the most perfect of performances. Okay, Donald Curry. But Donald Curry didn't maintain it over his career. And was the problem maybe making weight? That's what they said. But ultimately, he kind of started losing it. Some fighters age gracefully. Donald Curry didn't really age gracefully. When he started to lose it, he went from being an all-time great, based on a year or two. I don't mean he established himself as an all-time great, but talent-wise, to just a very good fighter. He lost to Lloyd Hunnigan. He was weight drained. Maybe it was a question of style.
Jack, when I got that call and knocked off the air, I didn't hear you. But what I was saying was, I had said after that fight, I think this kid is so good that I'm not sure Leonard and Hearns definitely beat him. I thought that highly of him. But now we found out he had maybe some substance problems. He had trouble making weight. And it's a shame because he fought Lloyd Hunnigan about 6 months after he fought McCrory. And he was taken apart by Hunnigan, Jack. He was never the same. He went 10-6 in his next 16 fights. And it's a shame because the best Donald Curry, I think, could have lived with any welterweight I had seen. And I'll tell you what, since Curry, I remember thinking, I can't remember the last time I was excited about a fighter. And since Curry, you know who that fighter is? Terrence Crawford. Now watch him get taken apart.
Well, but what happened with Donald Curry after losing to Hunnigan, he eventually won another version of a world title. Then he had a big fight against Mike McCallum. He moved up to junior middleweight. McCallum is a great fighter, great fighter. And Curry won 3 of the first 4 rounds.
He was winning the fight before he got caught.
Everything into it. McCallum wasn't a one-punch knockout artist, nowhere close. But McCallum caught Curry with a big hook while Curry was pulling
back. Yep.
And knocked out for 10 count. That was a bit of an aberration for Curry to get knocked out by McCallum with one punch.
Yeah, that wasn't the pristine Donald Curry.
Listen, if they fought 100 times, chances are that wouldn't have happened again. That sometimes happens, but it did happen. And, and then Curry
he had a short window, but for that window, if you could take him from that window and match him up with a lot of all-time greats, I could see him going 500. He was that good, but only for a little while.
Speaking of spotlight and an all-time great, spotlight fighter is familiar to everyone. Pretty iconic. Former multiple division champion Julio Cesar Chavez. We're talking about Salvador Sanchez not long ago, another great Mexican. But if there was a vote amongst fans, even the Mexican people, and this would include Canelo in the conversation, who's the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? It would be Julio Cesar Chavez would get the vote, the majority of the votes, I would think. What's your impression of Chavez? Are you biased against him because he beat your Philadelphia guy, Meldrick Taylor? So you're probably
Jack, I didn't even see that one coming. Okay, well, you know what, Jack? I'll get you back to New York guys.
Yeah.
No, but I will say this. That fight should not have been stopped, and Taylor was handling him and never was the same after that.
I shouldn't have set you up with that. I should have waited. But what did you think of Chavez's overall greatness? Do you rate him as an all-time great?
Yeah, Jack. I don't think he's at the top of the list, but I think he's up there. I mean, the guy's 31-4, 31-4-2 in title bouts, 3 division champ. He was an attacker. He was a great pressure fighter with a cast iron chin. He cut off the ring beautiful, had a great left hook to the body, was always in shape. His performance against Edwin Rosario back in November of '87 may have been his peak. His record is a who's list. My problem with Chavez later on was I didn't like how he reacted when things started not to go his way. I think that Frankie Randall was hosed the second time they fought. He clearly beat him the first time. He got a gift against Pernell Whitaker. But I mean, look, it's Chavez. How could you put him down? The guy was fun to fight. And for that run that he had from the mid-'80s into the mid-'90s, he was one of the top pound-for-pound guys. I would love to have seen him and Arguello fight at maybe 26 or 30 or even 35.
I'm going to tell you, you were mentioning earlier in the show, and it was just an example, nothing more, that had Listarza gotten the decision over Marciano, how the perception of Rocky might be different today. But let's talk about Chavez. When he was a champion, a junior lightweight champion, he got a couple of close decisions over Rocky Lockridge and Juan Laporte. Let's say Chavez didn't get those decisions or didn't get one of them. You know, the perception might not have been the same, because keep this in mind, Chavez had something like 87 fights before he officially lost.
Exactly.
We know Pernell Whitaker should have gotten the decision over him before that. They fought in San Antonio, and the consensus was that Whitaker won 8 rounds to 4. That was just about everyone's consensus. And Chavez was gifted with a draw in that fight. And then there was Frankie Randall after, but he was on the downside when he fought Randall. I think he was still in his prime when he fought Whitaker. But against Randall, you know, it was like most fighters, he was starting to go downhill a bit. But Chavez was a great fighter. Him and Alexis Arguello would have been a dream match, and it would have been a fight that really could have gone either way. It really could have gone
Jack, I think so. I like Arguello in that fight because of styles, but I could see Chavez giving him a hard time. I like Arguello. I'll tell you why. Because Chavez has to come into you. He's an attacker. He's a swarmer. I think at 130, 126, 135, I think that's suicide doing that against Alexis Arguello. And if you think about it, he had to go to 140 before he got stopped by another all-time great in his prime, in Aaron Pryor. So if it took Pryor 14 rounds to break him down, I don't think Chavez could knock him down or out. I would have taken Arguello, but I would have paid a lot of money to see that fight.
Yeah, you know, the most famous fight of Chavez's career, we could talk about it now, the first Meldrick Taylor fight. And I kind of changed my view a little over the years. At the time it happened, I was furious with referee Richard Steele because Taylor was winning the fight, headed to victory, got knocked down at the end of the fight. And my feeling was, you know, watch him carefully, you know, let him continue. But
there was only 2 seconds left, Jack. He couldn't even hit him.
My biggest beef, okay, with Richard Steele is still this. Okay, even though I'm willing to now give him a pass, and I'll explain why. He said even had he known there were 2 seconds, it wouldn't have made a difference. He still would have stopped the fight. That was such an idiotic remark to make. Chavez is standing across the ring with 2 seconds left, and you're going to stop it? It would take Chavez 2 seconds to just get to him, and the final bell rang.
And the 10-second warning light was on.
Richard Steele, you know, it was a clownish remark to make, unfortunately, by Richard Steele. But I'm thinking in terms this way. First off, Taylor was headed to victory, no doubt about it.
And he was beating him up, not just outboxing him.
A couple of things. He wasn't really beating Chavez up.
He was working him over pretty good, Jack.
No, he was outboxing him, putting on a clinic at times, but not punishing Chavez. Okay, let's put it that way.
Well, Chavez he wasn't close to going down, but he was landing some really good shots and stopping him in his tracks.
Of course he was, but when you say beating him up, I feel a guy.
I think he was doing more than outboxing him. I think he was handling him.
Okay, he was handling him. I agree. A couple of things stand out in that fight. Okay, going into the last round, one judge, okay, I think it was Dave Moretti, had Chavez ahead. What fight are you looking at then? I mean,
we could do 10 shows on that. That never ends.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it was an honest, let's say it's people have an honest assessment of Chavez. Listen, one judge had Canelo even with Mayweather at the end of the 12 rounds, and then the Whitaker-Chavez fight being called a draw. But that's not here with that. But late in the
Jack,
fight,
you know what I think hurt Meldrick Taylor in that fight? And I really believe this. If you remember back then, and I know you do, Chavez was the man in boxing. Other than Mike Tyson, Chavez was the man, and Taylor was so gunned up to beat him. I really think he went out in the 12th round against Lou Duva's instructions, and I think he wanted to try to get the stoppage, where if he would have stayed away and boxed him and played it safe, he probably finishes.
Frank, I disagree with you. I don't remember what Lou Duva said, and I like Lou Duva a heck of a lot. Good man. I like Lou Duva personally a lot. But I remember Gil Clancy talking right after the fight, saying you should never tell your fighter to do something he couldn't do. Supposedly, they were telling Meldrick Taylor you needed to stop Chavez. And that's what Clancy complained about. Never tell your fighter something he's not capable of doing. And there was no way Taylor could have stopped Chavez in the 12th round or had the power to knock him out at any other time. Maybe cut him.
No, but he could have moved and not engaged with him.
Let me get back. Let me finish my thought. So late in the fight, Taylor gets knocked down. And it's frustrating because you feel Taylor's headed to victory. Just make it to the final bell and the fight's yours. And it would have been on two of the scorecards. But so what happens? He gets knocked down. Lou Duva climbs the ring steps early. Shouldn't have done that before the final bell. But I guess Lou Duva, is maybe trying to get the ref to pause this or that, but it backfired because Meldrick Taylor took a look at his corner, and
yes,
he caught his eye. And Richard Steele is asking Meldrick twice, "Are you okay?" Had Meldrick Taylor nodded at once, I understand he's caught deep in thought. Yeah, let me fight. That's what fighters do a lot of times. They get knocked down. They might think, let me fight. But then again, Meldrick Taylor maybe never thought he was in danger of getting stopped because he'd been dominating. But it was a heavy knockdown. A very
no, he was hurt.
He was hurt. Okay, so Richard Steele stops it 2 seconds where I raged. But it came out later. Meldrick Taylor took a fierce beating in the fight, even though he was winning the rounds. He was winning the rounds, and should have gotten the
decision. It took everything out of him to fight Chavez the way he did.
But Chavez was hurting Taylor a lot more than Taylor was hurting him. It didn't translate into Chavez being given rounds or should have been given rounds. I agree. I had Taylor ahead. He was on his way to victory, and that my feeling on that hasn't changed. But I'm willing, considering the shape Meldrick Taylor was in afterwards and some of the ring deaths we've seen that come up all of a sudden late in the fight, one punch could just change everything. I thought under the circumstance of Taylor not responding to Steele the way, he maybe perhaps could have, I'm okay. I'm willing, in other words, to pardon Richard Steele. I'm not saying I agree with his decision to stop it, but I'm no longer one of those who's just mad at Richard Steele saying he messed up. He stopped it. I can understand why and let it go at that.
Jack, it bothered me then, and it bothers me now. And everyone talks about to this day, forget about what happened. We know what happened. I think it was stopped too soon. Meldrick was winning the fight. I think he went out to try to finish him. I've heard conflicting things about what the corner said, but the bottom line is this. He went out at a fast pace because I think he wanted to win by stoppage. However, everybody talks about, Whitaker beat Chavez and he did, okay? But that was 3 years later, okay? If you look and you go back and watch that fight and you see what Taylor was doing to Chavez, we had never seen anyone do that to Chavez before. I mean, Chavez is one of those guys, you're not going to knock him out. But, Jack, he was beating him almost like Robinson was LaMotta. He just couldn't finish him. But nobody gave Chavez any kind of a beating until Meldrick Taylor fought him. It's a shame because the kid's career was never the same. I remember.
Chavez was not taking a beating, Frank. He was getting outboxed. Meldrick Taylor was putting on a clinic at times with his.
Jack, you just because you're not hurt doesn't mean you're not taking a beating. Some guys you just can't hurt. They have steel here. But Chavez was getting beaten up and worked over. I'm telling you. But Jack, here's the funny thing. I remember going into Frazier's gym, had to be in the early 80s one Sunday. And Meldrick Taylor was probably about 10 or 11 there. And I see this little kid shadow boxing, and I knew his brother Myron. And I said, who's that? He goes, that's my brother. I said, that little kid looks like Sugar Ray Robinson. And he said, Frank, he goes, he's gunning for the Olympics in a couple of years. So maybe he was a little older than the 12 or 14, but he said, this kid he's going to be in the Olympics and he's going to win a gold medal. And it just so happens to be that he did. But to see him, might have been even before 80, but to see a kid that young put his punches together like he did, he looked like a little Sugar Ray Robinson.
Do you know what's going on with Meldrick Taylor now? He hit upon hard times, obviously. His career went downhill after losing the first Chavez fight. He did win a version of the belt. It was a good win over Aaron Davis. He won at the WBA welterweight title.
I was at that fight in AC.
There you go. But he wasn't the same Meldrick Taylor after the first Chavez fight.
No.
That includes the Davis fight. Then he had, the odd thing is he had the rematch with Chavez. Chavez had a lot more left than Taylor. Taylor was actually outboxing him for a good part of the rematch too. But then he didn't have the staying power because at the end, Taylor was just a shell of himself.
Jack, that fight took a lot out of Taylor. He was never the same. I mean, same thing. You could say, here's an example. Okay, look at the first Ali Frazier fight. When you're watching that fight, you're not really thinking Ali is beating him up, but he gave him a pretty good going over. And you know what? I think we both agree. Joe was never the same. As he had some good nights against Ali in Manila and the second quarry fight.
It's mental, Frank. It's not physical at all. It's mental. When you've put everything you have into something, you're not the same. Listen, I experienced that running marathons, okay? I'd run a few marathons in a row. I'd always gotten a personal best. And I was so psyched for one marathon. The weather conditions were bad. I had a horrendous race. And for the next 6 months, I hardly went out to run. Mentally wasn't the same. And then when I resumed, it just wasn't quite.
Mentally, it's a big part of it, Jack.
Yeah.
But, you know, even though I thought Meldrick was handling Chavez, that fight took a lot out of him because Chavez was a heavy hitter.
We should have spotlighted Meldrick Taylor. We're talking more about him than Chavez here.
Well, because that was Chavez's signature fight.
That's interesting. Signature win.
You said that's the fight everybody remembers him for. To me, that's a signature fight.
No, I agree. No, listen, I agree. I don't regret saying it, but I'm thinking that Chavez have any other fight that could compare to that. But let's think of it by next show if something pops into our head. But Frank, like always, it's great talking boxing. I can't wait to talk again next week. We'll have the Lomachenko fight to talk about and more news with the lightweight division, the other divisions. It's always been a pleasure. Okay. See you next week.
Jack, it was great talking to you. And until next week, we'll talk to you then.